also thank you for the invitation, for joining this webinar, and for the opportunity to share a few insights from our work. So yes, I work for an organization called Proforest. We make a lot of use of satellite and GIS products in our work. So I will be talking specifically about how we use these products for prioritization for addressing deforestation. And I mean, there's a bit difference with what Hans just shared, who was focusing more on near real-time monitoring. So in this work, we make more use of static products. But also maybe a few words on our organization for those of you who are not familiar with Proforest. So we are what we call a mission-driven organization. So we have a consultancy component and we have a not-for-profit component, but basically to support the transition to commodity production and sourcing that delivers positive social and environmental outcomes for people, places, and the planet. A whole mouthful, but basically for this webinar, our work to address deforestation is quite relevant. So we work across commodities. At the bottom of the slide, you can see a few commodities we work on. Palm is very important, but increasingly soy and beef in Latin America mainly, and sugar and rubber. Also, cocoa is increasing quite a lot on the agenda, and especially in West Africa, obviously. We work with various partners, so a huge chunk of our work is our work with companies. So we support companies in implementing more sustainable practices, but we are also frequently involved in multi-stakeholder initiatives and in building solutions and building capacity for addressing problems. This is where we are based. So we are a global organization. We have offices. Our headquarters is in the UK. We are very soon going to start up an office in the Netherlands also, then Malaysia and Indonesia. We have an office in Ghana, in Brazil, in Colombia, and in Mexico. But we also have a lot of staff that is like home-based, including myself. I'm based in Belgium, but supporting the UK office. So as I said earlier, we work directly with companies. A few of our clients are listed here on the slide. And these are companies along the whole supply chain. So we work with retailers like IKEA, McDonald's, for example. We work with manufacturers like Unilever, who else is listed here? Nestle, PepsiCo, and then also with the traders and with the producers, obviously. As I said earlier, we work along the supply chain, so that means that we work at the production level. We support producers with implementing more sustainable practices, like with land use planning assessment, with high conservation value assessments, and all of that, certification, obviously. But a large and important part of our work is on responsible sourcing, and I think that's relevant here for this webinar. So we help these downstream companies with sourcing in a responsible way or addressing issues on the ground through their supply chain. So it's really not about walking away from risk, it's really about addressing deforestation on the ground. So, I mean, maybe just to position ourselves a bit, we are very frequently the bridge between the campaigners and the companies. So in our support with companies. So this is just on the graphic on the visual on the top right corner of the slide shows basically our approach to responsible sourcing. There are a few steps we have identified. It all starts with companies that have to make a policy, a commitment on addressing deforestation, for example. Then the next step is to understand the supply base, plan intervention, then engage with suppliers and on the ground, and then monitoring progress. And it's basically the understanding the supply base that's in this framework is really important. The companies we work with are very often multinational global companies. They have massive supply chains from all over the globe. And first of all, it's important to understand where they are sourcing from. So where are the problems? what are the values that are risk of being lost in this framing for this webinar, deforestation, like high biodiverse forests, primary forests, or other forests, or other ecosystems even. And then where has the company any leverage to address these deforestation? For that understanding that supply base, we basically combine two different approaches, so two different sets of information. The first thing is the traceability information. Where exactly are you sourcing from? And it's quite surprising, but a few years ago, global companies, multinational companies, didn't really know where they were sourcing, and that has improved a lot over the last few years. And then overlay that supply base with a GIS analysis or a satellite analysis of where the problems are located. So that GIS and satellite, I mean, that remote sensing and GIS analysis is really essential in our work, and I will focus a bit more on that aspect here. So as I said earlier, commodity traceability has improved dramatically over the last few years, and particularly for palm. For other commodities, it's much more difficult. Especially like for beef has proven to be really complicated. But for palm and also soy, massive progress has been made. So maybe for palm, just to show a graphic on the right here. Is from a particular company. All the intermediaries, so there is the manufacturer, then is the trader, and then is the at the mill level. Most companies can now trace their products back to the mill. But it should be known, I mean, it should be mentioned that also the mill is an aggregator. Basically, the mill sources from an area surrounding the mill the fresh fruit bunches, so the fresh palm oil nuts. And as Rens correctly said earlier, it needs to take, I mean, the maximum time between the harvesting of the fresh fruit bunches and the arrival at the mill can be about 1 day. So that supply base of one particular mill is normally surrounded in the surroundings of this mill, and we normally assume about a 50-kilometer radius surrounding that mill. Now, it must be said that for large industrial plantations, the traceability information is well known. Mostly these plantations are associated with a particular mill, so the exact location of the producing location is known. But a lot of products, the exact location of palm is not known. So it's somewhere within the surroundings of that mill, but the exact location is often not known. For other commodities, it's not that there hasn't been that much progress as for palm, although like most, I mean, some of you will be familiar with the Trace platform, and Trace really managed to get a really good visibility of where soy is being sourced from. And they trace that down to the municipality level. So in Brazil, it's going back to municipality level, which is obviously and mostly much larger than that mill supply shed. So it's not as granular as for palm. Other commodities have proven to be much more difficult, as I said, like beef. At the same time, like there's this, I mean, over the years there has been this progress on traceability, but also there has been a proliferation of GIS and remote sensing products over the last few years. And we with Proforest, although we often work with partners to develop specific products. So we have been working with Aid Environment, but also Satelligent, for example. But we also very often make use of the shelf products that are publicly available. Like, for example, the Hansen deforestation data available on Global Forest Watch. There is quite detailed plantation information. There's information on protected areas, and when we do work for a specific country, we would often, I mean, obviously, make use of national level data sets and data layers. So in our work, what we would then typically do to prioritize areas for engagement, if we need to advise the client, this is an area where you might do something, we would combine these different products to develop tailored products for the work that we want to do. So this is normally a GIS exercise where we combine these different data products. And then as a last step, we overlay that's what we call almost like a risk assessment with that supply chain of that specific company, to see where this company might have leverage to address something. I'm just showing a few examples here of analyses that we've been doing. Like the top left, what you see is basically a heat map of deforestation events of the last few years, overlaid with protected areas, and then in purple you see the palm oil mills. I think this is in Kalimantan, and in orange are then the concessions, or the palm oil concessions, that are freely available. On the bottom right corner, you see a very similar image. So also here in purple, you see the palm oil mills, and basically the size of the symbol now reflects recent deforestation within that 50-kilometer radius surrounding this mill. And the top right corner is then a similar analysis for a sugar company, a sugar buying company. So that's what we do for specific companies, for individual companies, and we would then advise them where to go and where they're at risk or of sourcing products that are related to deforestation. Now, as I said, it's most of the time, as long as it's not coming from industrial plantation, it is a risk assessment. It's not for sure that deforestation within any of these areas, even close to a mill, is actually ending up in the mill. And that's really important to understand, that it's also not the mill's responsibility or fault that this deforestation is happening, because within that area of 50 kilometers surrounding the mill, they are only sourcing from roughly 1% of that total area. So 99% of what's happening within that area is completely beyond control of the mills. So there are still a few challenges. I mean, we are definitely not there yet. There has been massive progress with addressing deforestation within known concessions, and this very much relates to the work that Rens was highlighting. So we know in near real time when clearing happens within industrial plantations, we know with which supply chains these industrial plantations are linked. So there's progress there, but traceability to smaller producers is obviously often not known. And we should keep in mind that overall, like in Southeast Asia, about 50% of palm oil is being produced by these smaller producers. And also recent reports show that most of the clearing, I mean, the clearing done by the industrial actors has dropped a lot over the last few years. But for these smaller actors, they are, at this moment, they are driving deforestation in these geographies. Also important to know, I mean, very frequently supply chains are being shown or visualized as like a pyramid. You know, you have the manufacturer, and then they buy from a few traders, buy from many suppliers. But it's exactly the way around. So one producer sells to many traders, and every trader sells to many manufacturers. So in the end, it's not a supply chain, it's more like a supply web. And all these actors within the supply chain are connected. So these supply chains are not consolidated or anything. For most commodities, they are what we call non-sticky, so they are very dynamic. And also companies, today they might source from here, but the next day they source more from another mill, and the next day or the next quarter they source more from another mill, and then these mills also source from different producers on the ground, and that also keeps changing. It's an entirely dynamic thing that is happening. Which, I mean, that obviously, because these supply chains are very dynamic, and at the same time, downstream actors only buy a tiny fraction of each individual supplier. the leverage of these downstream actors over these producers is quite low. It's very difficult for a downstream actor to say, change the practices on the ground, or to push that through. So that's definitely a problem for addressing deforestation, because also, if it's not within an industrial plantation, can you go back, please? Sorry. Oh, okay, here. If it's not within an industrial plantation, deforestation normally occurs outside the supply base. It takes for palm roughly 5 years to produce the first fruits. So that means that clearing will happen today, and only within 5 years the fruits are being produced. And it's only at that point that it will enter supply chain of a downstream company. So that means activities need to address deforestation. That needs to be done in a proactive way. And it's there that all these landscape approaches and these cross-company collaborations come in. And that's also obviously quickly gaining importance, that all these different actors are joining forces and trying to address deforestation more holistically in a particular landscape. And also all these initiatives, prioritization is again very important to identify where the problem is, and this prioritization needs to be aligned with the goals of the collaboration. So whether you want to address deforestation by smallholders, whether you want to address deforestation done in a context of soy, that will be entirely different. So the prioritization will be different. I realized I only have a few minutes left, but just want to throw out an example here of some work that we've recently been doing on what we call production and protection beyond concessions, which is basically a collaboration between a number of large palm oil companies to scale up action for production and forest protection outside known concessions through proactive intervention and targeted monitoring. So here we're really trying to address deforestation conducted by smaller actors outside these consolidated supply chains and industrial plantations. What we're trying to do here, so there are two main activities. The first step is the prioritization activities. Where is the problem and where is their leverage of these palm oil companies? And then secondly is the development of an action protocol to engage with village decision-making structures and all of that to address the problem on the ground. Just for the prioritization, so what we did basically is we focused on Indonesia and Malaysia. We identified critical conservation areas. We overlaid that with what we call palm oil expansion areas, so areas relatively close to mills, where the terrain, geophysical characteristics of the terrain would allow palm oil expansion, so not very steep slopes, not in swampy areas and all of that. And we overlay that with an assessment of like where is deforestation happening outside concessions. So we asked one of the partners, Ada Environment in this case, to run all the deforestation alerts over the last few years and to only select those that are happening without outside known concessions. And based on that, we identified the villages that are where this type of deforestation is mostly happening. And just to give you an idea, I'm not able to share the results yet, but out of in Indonesia, 80,000 villages, we realized that 50% of the deforestation, of this type of deforestation, is happening in only 200 of them. So by focusing efforts on these 200 villages and engaging with village decision-making structures and really investing in these villages to come up with more effective and more sustainable land use planning, it is in theory possible to address 50% of the deforestation related to clearing for palm. Just one more slide on a few like next steps, and I think just to throw out a few things that are still missing and that would really help our work in addressing deforestation. It's like we have a good understanding, at least there's publicly available information on the clearing of forest or of canopy cover, basically, but often it's not known there's no information on specific ecosystem types and biodiversity. So it's quite a crude metric, and a further refinement of that metric would definitely help, and especially if publicly available. Then the second point, and I think is really important, we see now everything from space. It really is possible, if you throw money at it, to identify the clearing of one individual tree. But what's often missing is like how to connect it with other databases. Like, for example, the legal status of land is not publicly available. So, and that can then help to identify the driver behind deforestation. So I mean, it's surprising, but like for Indonesia, there is no publicly available information on legal status of land, for example. And that links then to the third point. If it was possible to connect these very powerful satellite imageries with information on legal status of land, it would be possible to identify the drivers of deforestation, whether deforestation is commodity driven or not commodity driven, which commodity is driving it. I mean, even in Southeast Asia, a lot of clearing is linked to expansion for rubber, for example, and the type of actors, to differentiate between smaller actors or larger actors, whether it's industrial and all of that. That would really help to tailor our interventions and to understand better what is happening in specific geographies. And while many downstream companies have identified where they source from, so a link to that pyramid from earlier, it's not really known if there's a problem in a certain geography. It would be really helpful to know immediately which are the downstream actors that are linked to that. Not to blame them, but really to join forces with those downstream actors, whether it's within palm oil or with other commodities, and to join forces in trying to address that problem on that ground, basically to create that leverage. And I think more information on that, obviously that's confidential in most cases, would be really, really useful. I think that's all from my side. So I hope I stick to my time limit. Thanks a lot. If there are any questions, let me know.